The valley carried secrets the way old timbers carried scarsa, and that night, every whispering cedar and wind-cut ridge seemed to hold its breath. Folks had talked plenty about the rancher, how he kept to himself, how he worked harder than any 10 men, and how danger followed him the way dust follows a horse's hooves. But none of those rumors prepared her for what she was about to witness. She had saddled her mare with the fire in her chest, determined to confront him, determined to reclaim her pride after weeks of tension between them. She expected arguments, maybe even a bitter truth or two. What she did not expect was a storm. Clouds gathered low and heavy like bruises on the sky. Lightning cracked across the distant ridge, painting the land in momentary streaks of white. The wind pushed against her as if begging her to turn back, but she nudged her mare forward. Pride had carried her this far, stubbornness would take her the rest of the way. She wasn't the kind of woman who backed down, and not from storms, and definitely not from a man who had unknowingly tangled her heart into knots. By the time she reached the main stretch of his property, the rain had begun, sharp, cold, unkind. It stung her skin and soaked her coat through, but she hardly felt it. Her eyes were locked on the distant figure fighting the storm with bare hands and sheer will. He didn't see her. He was too busy wrestling chaos. The cattle were panicking, stampeding across the open pasture in a frenzy that could destroy his livelihood in minutes. In that moment she realized she had never truly understood how much one man could carry alone. He sprinted across the soaked ground, his boots slipping, his clothes plastered to his skin. Each movement was a battle. Each breath was wrestled from the storm. Lightning crashed again, illuminating him in a harsh white flash that cut through the darkness. In that split-second silhouette she saw the truth. He wasn't fighting just to save animals, he was fighting because failure meant letting everything he'd built crumble, and he was not the kind of man who let anything go without a fight. She pulled her horse to a stop, breath caught in her throat. She had seen men work hard, she had seen men put on brave faces, but she had never seen anyone throw himself into danger the way he did, with a kind of raw, unbreakable devotion that made the storm itself seem like a rival rather than a threat. Without thinking, she slid off her mare and took a few steps forward, drawn toward him like a compass needle pulled toward true north. The first deed happened so fast she barely registered it. A young steer had broken away from the group and was headed straight toward a ravine carved deep into the land. If it slipped, it would fall, and if it fell, it would drag others with it. He sprinted after it, boots splashing, breath burning, and just as the steer reached the edge, he lunged. She gasped as his hands gripped the animal's flank and forced it sideways with a strength she didn't know he had. The steer skidded, stumbled, and regained its footing, safely redirected. He didn't pause to celebrate. He didn't even check if he was hurt. He just kept moving. She had come expecting a conversation, or maybe even an argument that could clear the air between them. But now all she could do was stare, silent, as the storm intensified and he refused to yield. Thunder rolled across the valley like an ancient drumbeat. Rain poured so heavily it was hard to see more than a few feet ahead. The land had turned to mud, thick and sucking at his boots, trying to pull him down. But he dragged himself through it anyway. The second deed hit her hard, but not in shock this time, but in the chest, where emotions she didn't want to name began to twist. A calf, no older than a few weeks, had become tangled in a coil of wire blown loose by the wind. Every time it struggled, the wire cut deeper. Its cries pierced through the storm. She watched him skid to a stop beside it, drop to his knees, and shove his bare hands into the mess of barbs. The wire sliced into his skin instantly, bright lines of blood mixing with the rain. But he didn't hesitate. He didn't even flinch. He worked the wire apart, untangling knot after knot, his breath sharp with effort. She could see the pain in his face, but he endured it, jaw set, eyes fierce. When the calf was finally free, she expected him to collapse. Instead, he scooped it up, hands bleeding, arms trembling, and carried it to shelter, whispering something soft she couldn't quite hear. Her heart clenched. Something inside her shifted, something she had kept locked away. She pressed a hand to her chest, trying to steady her breath. The storm wasn't just outside anymore. It was inside her too, a swirling, breaking, revealing. And then came the third deed, the one that stole her breath completely. A loud crash echoed through the valley, a wood splintering, metal twisting. Her eyes snapped toward the old storage shed near the far fence line. Lightning struck close enough to shock the air, and part of the structure collapsed. Through the rain and dust, she saw movement, a horse trapped beneath fallen beams, thrashing wildly. He didn't hesitate, not even for a heartbeat. He ran faster than she thought a man could run after everything he had already done. He vaulted over a fallen gate, slid across mud, and threw himself into the wreck. The beams were heavy, dangerously unstable, and the horse was panicking. One wrong move and both of them could be crushed. She felt panic rise in her throat, the kind that made her want to scream his name into the storm. But she stayed frozen, watching with helpless fear as he braced his shoulder beneath a beam and pushed with everything he had. Muscles strained, his breath roared louder than the thunder. Inch by inch, he lifted the weight off the terrified mare long enough for her to scramble out. When he finally stepped back, the entire structure groaned under its own broken weight. For a terrifying second she thought it would collapse on him, bury him alive. But he darted out just in time, rolling through the mud as the shed caved in behind him. That was when he looked up and saw her. Mud streaked his arms, blood dripped from his knuckles, rain poured down his face, yet his eyes, dark and intense beneath wet lashes, locked onto hers with a force that made the storm seem irrelevant. She had come to confront him, to demand answers, to demand clarity, but now all she could think was that she had never in her life witnessed a man who met danger like this, who ran toward it rather than away. In that moment, as the storm raged around them, she understood something she couldn't put into words. The night hadn't just revealed who he was. It had revealed who she was becoming. For a long moment, neither of them moved. The storm crackled around them, thunder rolling through the valley like the growl of some ancient beast, but it all felt distant to Mutita, as if the world itself was holding its breath. He stood there, chest heaving, rain dripping from his hair, mud streaked across rugged features carved by years of hardship. She had seen strength before, but not like these, and not strength sharpened by sacrifice, shaped by duty, softened only in the rare, fleeting glances he allowed the world to witness. And one of those glances was aimed at her now. She opened her mouth to speak, but the words tangled on her tongue. She wasn't sure what she had meant to say anyway. That she was sorry, that she shouldn't have come, that watching him throw himself into danger 3 times in one night made something inside her ache in ways she wasn't ready to admit. None of those words would survive the storm. Instead, all she managed was a shallow breath as he stepped toward her. When he finally reached her, his voice was quiet, too quiet for a man who had just fought chaos with his bare hands. "You shouldn't be out here," he said, a mix of concern and something deeper woven into the low rumble of his tone. The rain softened between them, falling like a curtain that separated this moment from the rest of the world. She wanted to snap back with something clever, something sharp, something that would keep her defenses intact, but that armor felt heavy now, heavier than the storm-soaked coat clinging to her shoulders. "I came because a broken bar," she began, hesitating as her pulse thundered louder than the storm. "Because I needed to understand you." His brows pulled together, not in anger, but in confusion. "Understand me?" She swallowed hard. The truth was a fragile thing, trembling just beneath her ribs. "You keep pushing me away," she said. "One moment you're warm, and the next you're cold. I couldn't keep guessing who you were anymore. I had to see it for myself." And tonight a broken bar. Her voice faltered as her gaze drifted toward the field he'd fought so desperately to protect. "Tonight, I did." He shifted slightly, rain dripping from the brim of his hat in a silver stream. "What did you think you'd find?" he asked softly. She laughed on thin, breathless, disbelieving. "Not this," she almost whispered. "Not you throwing yourself into danger over and over. Not you bleeding from animals who can't give you anything in return. Not you standing there like the storm's equal." He didn't look proud. If anything, he looked almost embarrassed, a faint flush beneath the rain. "It wasn't bravery," he muttered, looking away. "It was duty. The ranch a broken bar, these animals a broken bar, they're all I have. I can't afford to lose them." That simple confession stung her far more than she expected. All he had, was that truly how he saw his life? Empty land, hard work, and a loneliness he never spoke about aloud. She took a step closer. "You have more than that," she said, her tone gentler now. "People care about you more than you think." He lifted his gaze back to hers, and for a heartbeat, the world narrowed to the space between them. "People care," he echoed. "But caring doesn't mean staying. It doesn't mean not leaving when things get hard." Her breath caught. She knew exactly what he meant, and not because he'd told her, but because the pain in his voice revealed everything. Someone had left him. Someone had promised forever and walked away anyway. The storm had carved more than scars on his line. It had carved wounds into his heart. She reached up, hand trembling, and brushed a strand of wet hair from his forehead. He didn't pull away. If anything, he leaned into her touch, as if he needed it more than the ground beneath his boots. "I'm not them," she said quietly. "I'm not here to hurt you." His jaw tightened, as though he wanted to believe her but didn't know how. "Then why did you come tonight?" he asked again, not as a challenge but as a plea for truth. This time she didn't hesitate. "Because I couldn't shake the feeling that there's more to you than the walls you hide behind," she said. "Because every time you look at me like you're trying not to feel something, I feel it twice as strong." She exhaled shakily. "Because you make me angry, and confused, and drawn in all at once, and because I needed to know if the pull I feel toward you is real or if I'm just imagining things." Silence cracked open between them, raw and unshielded. Rain softened into a drizzle. Thunder rolled farther away, as if giving them space. Finally, he closed the gap between them, his hand lifting hesitant, gently to touch her cheek. His thumb brushed against her skin, warm even in the cold. "You're not imagining it," he said, voice just above a whisper. The world stopped spinning. For the first time since she'd arrived, the storm felt like an afterthought, fading behind the heat of his touch and the pounding of her heart. She had imagined moments like these, thought about them, denied them, replayed them in dreams, but none of those thoughts had captured the gravity of standing this close to him, with the truth finally exposed between them like a flame in the dark. But just as she began to lean in, he pulled back a step. "Not far but enough." "I can't promise you easy," he said, a shadow crossing his eyes. "I can't promise you a quiet life. The ranch takes everything from me. Some days it feels like there's nothing left to give anyone else." She stepped forward again, refusing to let fear carve distance where closeness had just begun. "I didn't come here for easy," she replied. "I came because tonight I saw the kind of man you are, the kind who fights for what he loves without hesitation." He blinked, startled. "What I love?" "Don't pretend you don't," she said softly. "You wouldn't have thrown yourself into danger 3 times tonight if you didn't love this land, a broken bar, this life, yeah, a broken bar, these animals. Your heart was in every step you took." His breath hitched, not because he disagreed but because he couldn't hide anymore. Lightning flickered weakly behind the clouds, a last surrender. He looked at her, vulnerability raw and open on his face. "I don't know if I can be what you deserve," he admitted. She reached for his hand, intertwining her fingers with his. "Mud, rain, blood, up, it didn't matter. You already are," she whispered. "You just don't see it yet." For a moment he stood still, his hand trembling in hers, and then he squeezed gently, as though accepting something he'd been afraid to name. The storm had brought chaos, fear, and danger, but it had also brought the truth neither of them could take back now. As the clouds parted and the first hint of starlight touched the valley, she realized something with absolute certainty. She hadn't just come here seeking answers, she had come here seeking him, and for the first time, he was finally letting himself be found.